Welcome all to our initial version of the conversation, energy conversation around the 7 questions that gets to CEOs and company founders and why they do what they do and what they're learning. My name is Peter Kelly Detweiler. I've been in this space for a long time, and I've been privileged to meet and get to know a lot of people in the space. But one of the most fascinating characters and entrepreneurs I've met in recent years that I got a chance to write about in my book is Jeremy McCool. And he is CEO of HEVO, which is a wireless EV induction charging technology. And he's got a really interesting foundational story, how he got into this. Jeremy, you were welcome to the conversation. Thanks for joining us. And by the way, I understand the heat is not working in your apartment, so you really are McCool today.
If you could, it wouldn't be a starting podcast for your series unless something was going wrong. So we're dealing with some interesting things here, but happy to warm up on this podcast with you today. And I think I had no other choice. Whenever you sent out that great message about what should we do for this podcast, I responded with a pretty straightforward answer to that. I think I trapped myself into it, so I had to bring myself forward into this and be the first to go at this, and really happy to be the first to do this, and delighted to have also been part of your book. Thank you for including us in that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And you had a really interesting story in that book in terms of when you were in the armed forces in Baghdad, how you got involved in energy. Can you tell us, like, in a minute or so? I know that's a tight encapsulation. Like, how did you get into this space, and what was that driving force?
Trying to figure out how to bring power back into the city of Baghdad. All of the neighborhoods had dropped power down to less than 1 hour a day. What we did is we worked with local business people that wanted to help to reconstruct the city and the country. And we did that by bringing in microgeneration, these 100 kilowatt generators that ran on diesel into these neighborhoods, and helped to finance those. But what we found out is we put those into those neighborhoods. It was causing all these respiratory and epidemiological issues. So we had to resituate them outside of the neighborhoods and securitize them. So what we really came to find out was, it's one thing to have power, but you need to have power that doesn't hurt people. And when I took a look at that from a macro level, I said, okay, this is what we're doing around the globe. So when I came back to the US, I made a decision that I would do anything I could to radically reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.
You didn't know a lot about electricity at that point when you came back, but you jumped in with both feet and you end up being CEO of HEVO, this wireless charging company, which has had a pretty considerable level of success. How did that happen? You know, in 100 words or less.
I came back, I went to Columbia for my grad school, found out that I really loved renewables and even more electric vehicles. Got started at a solar startup in 2010 in San Francisco. Liked that startup scene, kind of foundational piece of it, but I also really wanted to get into this EV side of the house. So as I started to investigate it as my grad level research, I found that what was missing to really spark this transition to EVs was the infrastructure. And the infrastructure that was being brought forward was always, even in the early days, having problems with user error and user experience. I started to ask big fleets what they wanted to do, that were starting to transition to electric vehicles and what it would take for them to transition to more. And they said, get rid of the cord. And so I took that as a call to action, looked at different options. Wireless charging was one of them. And I said, wow, this has really something where we can make this universal, unlimited way for people to drive, charge, and enjoy driving electric vehicles. So that was really the launch point. From there, 10 years later, much more in that journey.
It sounds like the classic, boy, if I only knew now or then what I knew now, I would have been able to avoid a lot of steps along the way. But so certainly during the course of that path you've been on, you must have made some missteps. I think we talked about it before, some failure, if you want to call it that, something that all humans are afraid of. What's been your biggest misstep or failure, and why did that happen, and how did you respond to it?
Anytime that a failure happens in any shape or form, especially when it comes to the early days of starting a company, it usually falls into one or two categories. First is the founders. Are they capable to be able to do the job? We'll just say that's one part. And then are they able to inspire people to get on the journey with them. Where you start to find companies that are transitioning out of those early days of, hey, let's just go get this done and sweat equity and work for it to get to stage 1, stage 2, and you start to get to the point where you've raised capital and are able to hire. That's when you really start to see the real salt of a founder, because they prove themselves by who they hire. And you can really look at any company in the early days and really determine how much success they're going to have just by who they have around them, and who's been brought onto the team and who they can hire. So early in the phase of things, it's all sweat equity, and you got to do what you can with who's willing to jump on board with you, right? But once you finally got that investment, you got to start making those hires. You start paying people payroll. That's when it really becomes a company in many ways. And so all the early failure points that have happened have always been related to not the right hires, not that they were bad people, not that they didn't want to try and work in developing this thing forward together, but it was more not the right fit, whether it was a cultural issue or we just chose the wrong experience and expertise level. It always came down to likely something directly related to hiring. And because of that, I would state that the worst thing you can do as a founder is make a decision to not tell that person that they're not the right fit and let it go on, because it hurts the team. It also hurts their potential for other opportunities. And at the end of the day, you're hurting the company. So really straight to the point, it's always been on the hire side. We've been lucky to have great people all along the way, but there's been a couple points where got it wrong on the hire side.
So that must take a bit of leadership courage, because you've got to, A, let that person go in a way that's as gentle and humane as possible, and then B, communicate that to the rest of the team so that they don't feel like, oh, am I next? But in fact, this decision has been made for the well-being of the company and its mission, all of us going forward. How does that conversation unfold?
It's definitely requires some TLC while you're doing it. So first is the person needs to be in that conversation. You can't do it without them being part of it. And if you're going to do it right, you got to inform them, of course, of what this decision is and how you got there with it, right? With a team that's small, it's a family more than it is even a team when it's super small. And so any person that is asked to leave or they resign, whatever it might be, it does could potentially, I should say, have a problematic translation to the team. So the best way that I've found to do that is just to be upfront and honest and say, look, we've had a great role and journey on the road with this person. They've made a decision, or we made a decision. It's time for us to move on because we've got this next strategy in line. Obviously key to that is all of you that are part of this. We're going to always wish the best for that teammate and continue to pat them on the back and applaud them where we can. And if they ever need our help with something, we're going to be there for them. So I think part of that is letting them know it's not just pushing them out, but you're actually helping them to step forward in their next part of their professional life as well. And what I have found from at least what we've gone through in the past of this is that every time we've gone through this process, every single time, we've had to go through a process and letting somebody go because I made the wrong decision in that hire, or it was time to move on to another expert with a different level of experience and expertise, was that person found an incredible job and became a leader in their next role in a very, very direct way. And so I would say we've been very lucky, not only in the people that we brought into the team, but what our team has done for other companies and moving on and taking all the things, the values, the way that we do business in the HEVO way and taking that into their next experience. It's been foundational for them in many ways in helping to propel their own professional careers forward.
That's a great way to think about it, which is releasing them to go and find their best potential. Yep. So knowing what you know now, you've been at this 10 years, if you had a restart, granted the whole environment has evolved over the last decade as well, what one thing might you have done differently if you were to start over and do it again?
I think the first steps in creating a company it comes down to the second, third, fourth, and fifth person, because one person with an idea is not a company. That second person is the first validation point that this idea matters. And then they are responsible for helping you as much as you are to, as a founder, to recruit other people to the team. So what I would say is, if I could do it over again and do it better, I wish I had the knowledge of 10 years of being a CEO at day one of being CEO. and a lot of that is just the immaturity of the situation of being a young CEO without having been a CEO of any other company in my past. Having been a leader, but not a CEO. And there is a bit of a difference of being a military leader, to say the least, than there is of being a tech CEO. And I would frame it like this, just to get direct to it. I wish I could have been more direct and focused in the early years with my team, where we misstepped because of my lack of either decision or because of something that was directly pointed back to me as a leader. So in the early years, especially when you're category creating, it's like a deep abyss of possibility, and you're searching around for where's the best opportunity for us to go. And that gets to become a struggle if you don't make decisions. And so early on, chiefly was on me to make hard decisions. I didn't always make that clear. Once I found that path though, it was easy to align everybody behind it. But I had to go through a carousel of multiple iterations of people to get to a point to do that and finally be able to put us on the right path. So focusing on one specific pathway, not trying to go after everything, is the clear guidance there.
Boy, that's got to force an awful lot of personal growth along that journey. I got one last question for you. So you've been doing some interesting research work, and I know, we've got an NDA, and so I won't divulge anything, but what can we expect to see from HEVO in the next months and years to come? So
this year, you'll see HEVO expand its production capacity to a few thousand units worth of production capability. We'll execute a handful of supplier agreements that will give us the ability to show the world that there are automakers and tier ones who believe in wireless EV charging. We just, in the last 48 hours, have seen the announcements from the state of Michigan. One being that they have already announced they're going to do a wireless mile in the Detroit area. And then Representative Lawrence has already came forward with a $50 million bill that would potentially roll out wireless charging throughout the state of Michigan. And so this kind of introduction is happening at the moment. What we do know is that HEVO will be at the top of the list with 2 to 4 other companies that are going to be in the vehicle starting in 2024, 2025. So what that means is that we're just a couple years away from that being factory built in, and you can just drive a vehicle off the lot with wireless charging. And just a few more years after that, you'll be able to drive and charge at the same time. Final part of that is currently we're doing aftermarket solutions, predominantly focused on fleet. We are looking at distributor agreements at the moment that would allow us to start putting it into consumers' homes and on their vehicles in the next year or so. So targeting at this moment 1.5+ million in revenues just for this year, and growing that 5 to 10-fold in the next year after that, and seeing that kind of growth. We have seen the data so far looks like 3 million electric vehicles with wireless charging by 2025, about 14 million by 2030, and 40 million by 2035. It's a pretty good market to be in.
It makes me really grateful I caught you now, because within a year or two, you won't have a moment of free time. I know your schedule's already busy. You flew in just last night from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Conference out in California. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing some of your insights with us. And I know my audience will join me in wishing you the greatest level of success in those months and years to come. Thanks a lot,
With
Jeremy.
pleasure. Can't wait to see where we go from here.